Hello everyone. Thanks for attending this latest distinctive discussion with Councillor Andrew Brown. It's good to see some familiar names on the call and a couple that I don't know, but it's good to have you all with us. So thanks for taking the time out this afternoon. I'm Ben Lowndes. I run a consultancy called Distinctive Communications in Bristol. I'm really grateful to have Andrew join us this afternoon to talk about his responsibilities and his role within a new model of governance that Bristol City Council established earlier this year. And this is happening in the context of quite a bit of change anyway, nationally, locally, socially, sort of technologically as well. All of this is impacting how people live and work and do things in different ways. And cities like Bristol have a really important role to play in those conversations. So we're looking forward to sort of hearing more about that. And turning to the person who's with us today, so Andrew Brown has been a Liberal Democrat councillor since 2021, active in his community, prominent within the authority. He's led his group on the council. He's chaired the audit committee in the time he's been a councillor as well, and he's now one of 8 policy committee chairs overseeing important areas of council business. And we'll just put a slide up now to highlight what those committees are. So thank you for sharing that. Hopefully that is coming up, is it? Yeah, so one of 8 policy committee chairs. Andrew's committee carries the title of Economies and Skills, quite a broad remit. And as you can see here, just sort of turning to the responsibilities, I'll just leave that there for a sec. There's quite a broad range of responsibilities on this. This is from the council's website, so hoping sort of it's still correct from when it's been published. And I hope we've left enough time to do it justice today, but we'll take that down now. And just to explain the approach to the webinar briefly. So we'll start with a discussion, half a dozen questions or so. We'll follow that up with some questions from yourself too. Thanks to those who have submitted some for us. I've got them sort of captured here. If you want to ask questions as we go through this tab, which you should see, if your setup is the same as mine, you should see that sort of on the bottom right of your screen. So you'll just be able to sort of press that and drop a question in there. So please get those into us and we'll answer as many as we're able to. And we'll just move on to the discussion. So Andrew, great to have you here today.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, please start by introducing yourself and talking about the role within Bristol.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So you gave me a little potted history of my history in politics. I have to make a couple of minor corrections. I've not led my group. I'm deputy leader of my group. So, okay. But that's a minor thing. Yeah, and so I've been a councillor now since 2021. I've got experience, as you say, as chairing audit committee. I was also latterly on overview scrutiny and management board under the previous setup. So that sort of experience gave me quite a wide overview of the council's financial situation. I guess start here because that's not the last time that's going to come up, I'm sure. But also the sort of broad operations of the council. In addition to that, I spent some time on planning committee. So I've seen the planning process from the sharp end, so to speak. So moving into the committee system, I've taken on the role of chair of the Economy and Skills Committee, and I think the first thing to say is that that's not directly comparable to the previous role of cabinet member, and as far as the actual decision-making power rests with the committee. So any key decisions, and those are anything that involves expenditure over £500,000 or affects 2 or more wards in the city, have to come to committee for approval and decision making. However, the role does come with a lot of soft power. and that's around things like giving officers steer when they're developing policy, giving them steer on day-to-day operations that that won't require committee decisions. It's being the public face of the committee, and it's sort of engaging on behalf of the committee with residents, with civic interest groups, third sector, businesses, all the stakeholders that we have in the city. There's a role within the as chair to sort of monitor and scrutinise the plans as they're coming through. Again, that's part of the sort of shaping and giving officers steer of things. We have weekly meetings with officers, briefings on what's being developed, the direction of travel. So that's sort of role beyond the weekly meetings with officers. I have frequent meetings with colleagues, liaison with other committee chairs, so that there's a sort of knowledge of what's going on across the committees and a knowledge of what's going on across the council. Frequent discussions with senior officers, chief executive, the leader of the council, and the Section 151 officer who controls the purse strings. The priorities of the committee are sort of initially, the initial work programme is sort of follows on from the work programme that was already in train. So the key thing that a lot of people will be interested in is the local plan. Obviously, that was approved at full council in, I think it was October or November last year. Mm-hmm. And officers continued to work on that, and it was submitted in April to the Planning Inspectorate. So that is now with the Planning Inspectorate. I've had representation suggesting that I should pause that process, or that that we should reflect on changing priorities as a council, but also the changing landscape nationally. But we are keen to get a new local plan in place as soon as possible, and we'll maybe talk a bit more about that a bit later on.
Yeah.
Another key piece of work is moving to, which is more practical level, is moving to a situation where the planning department can be de-designated. As I'm sure a lot of people on the call will know, our non-major applications were subject to a designation by national government last year, and that means that people who are putting in those applications can choose to go direct to the Planning Inspectorate rather than have them go through the council's process. And we'll be making progress towards de-designation and getting things back on an even keel within the planning department. We've got a piece of work that started prior to the elections as an economic strategy. We're looking to update the previous economic strategy that the city had. Now, the previous one had gone through the One City process, and it's a COVID recovery strategy effectively. And this new one is going to be owned by the council. And again, we can maybe talk a bit more about that later on. Another big part of the brief, and something I had less sort of oversight and knowledge of prior to taking on the role, is the harbour operations. And there's lots of legislation that governs the harbour separate or adjacent to the local government legislation. And one of the key things that's come out of recent reports into the harbour was that there needed to be improvements in management of the harbour authority and the operations within the harbour, and B, that budgets within that should be ring fenced, and the harbour should be self-sustaining and not be subsidised by the general fund of the council as a whole. So we're moving. There's been a series of activity in terms of governance of the harbour, and looking at the financial situation and how we get to a position of sustainability within the harbour. And that's sort of an ongoing piece of work, which is broader, which is within the broader scope of the committee. Another priority of mine is to improve or increase engagement, and much of my first few months in role have been meeting with various stakeholders, as I think, as I already mentioned, to get a feel for what perceptions are about, where different stakeholder groups feel the priorities of the council should be, where the council could do better, and what people are really looking for the council. That's something that's sort of ongoing. And then in the longer term, I think I'm quite keen to sort of evolve planning policies and the shaping of the city, and I think we've got sort of some initial ideas about the ways that could be done. But I think in the meantime, we're really focused on, as I say, getting planning back on an even keel and getting the local plan through before we sort of advance that agenda. And all of this is, of course, against the backdrop of the financial challenges. And I know people have seen authorities elsewhere declare Section 114 notices, Birmingham being the prime example. But across local government, finances are challenged primarily by adult social care funding, the dedicated schools grant and high needs in particular, and provision of temporary accommodation, and Bristol's no exception. So the broader challenge to the council is living within its means and finding more efficient ways to do things, so that we don't go down the same route as Birmingham and other authorities. And the final thing I just wanted to say on here, and it sort of underpins a lot of other things, particularly in economic strategy, is the skills element of the brief, and that's one that I'm still getting briefings on, and still trying to find the best ways of making that skills element, boosting that skills element to the benefit of the city as a whole.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that overview, and I think it sort of illustrates quite vividly just the breadth of the role and responsibilities that were on that slide that we shared before introducing you. Really multifaceted, multi-layered, and it sounds like you've had a busy first few weeks into the role. How has it felt? How have the first few weeks felt? I mean, given that we'd actually had a general election as well, which you were standing in. It was are you happy with where we've got to now?
Broadly, yeah, it's been a whirlwind, and there's no getting away from that. The general election stymied things a bit, because obviously focus was elsewhere. Even those of us who were standing in seats we weren't necessarily contesting did have requirements to go to seats where we had better opportunities. But and more broadly, it puts the council into the whole pre-election period setup. It sort of gets in the way of what could be announced, what could be talked about from a council perspective as well. So that was a challenge. On top of that, I've been moving house recently, so just to add complications to things. But so it has been a whirlwind. There's been a sort of treadmill of briefings and meetings for me, and at times I felt like I've just had huge amounts of information dumped on me. But I wouldn't swap it for the world. It's hugely interesting, hugely enjoyable, and it's a real opportunity to try and make a difference. As I say, the actual decision making power rests with the committee, but there's a lot of soft power around that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the challenges are big, but if you can move forward on them, then that's positive, isn't it? You talked about engagement, sort of part of your role and conversations. How do you think the businesses and stakeholders that you're speaking to have sort of responded to the changes in the new dynamic in the city? What sort of things are they saying to you?
Yeah, I've had a lot of positive responses, which is good. I think there's a sort of couple of key themes that come out. I think lots of people are glad that we're keeping the one city approach. I think there was a lot of nervousness about whether that would be retained, what it would look like going forward. The fact that, it was previously, I think in a lot of people's heads, very much identified the mayor and the mayoral system and the mayor's office. And so I think people have responded well to us maintaining the one city approach. I think people are also happy that I'm glad that I'm happy to meet with them. So I've, met a number of developers or comms people about different developments within the city. I've met various residents groups, civic groups, and sought to find ways of engaging and ways of negotiating, I guess, how we can best, how they can best help the council and how the council can best help them and in their aims.
Yeah.
I think the other thing I'd say on this is we've also seen an increase in the opportunities for residents to interact with the council. So, previously public forums, all the committees have public forums, but having gone from one cabinet every month to 8 committees meeting throughout the year, I think has seen an increase in the opportunities for people to put in representations. And I know myself, I was chairing the Harbour Committee yesterday, and we had 51 public questions in from residents within the harbour, and a number of statements as well. And that sort of level of engagement is not something that you would have necessarily seen in in meetings previously. So I think it's good to see those increased opportunities for public engagement actually being taken up.
Yeah, so people are responding to it. That is a good response actually for the Harbour Committee. We have some familiarity with what's going on down there through our work with one of our clients who may be on the call actually. So one of the areas you spoke about is the council's economic strategy. Can you tell us more about that and how that's going?
Yes and no, I think is the answer to this one. So it was on the work stream, and and there had been some preliminary work carried out prior to the change of system. There had been engagement through the One City process on the economic strategy, and various stakeholders had been consulted, and it's gone back to officers. And initially, when we came in on the committee system, it was anticipated that we would move to a situation where an options paper came to committee, I think probably scheduled for the September committee. That would give the bare bones of the strategy, but different options and how it could be developed. However, one of the decisions we made early on was that it'd be better to do that in a workshop environment with councillors cross-party councillors across the committee. So those workshops are happening in the next, I want to say next week, but in the next few weeks. As an aside to this, one of the things that's happened is I've lost control of my diary. So I've got help with diary management, which is great, but it does mean that things, invitations to things are received and accepted without me necessarily knowing, and then I find them in my diary and go, oh, that's what I'm doing today. So we've got a workshop on that, and then there'll be further engagement and consultation exercises through One City and through other prior to back to committee early in 2025.
Yeah, the diary management element sounds like a roller coaster in itself.
Just one other thing I was worth mentioning on economic strategy is it's not the only part of the council or city where economic strategy is being considered at the moment. There's also a sort of parallel process within the Temple Quarter LLP to look at their inclusive growth strategy, and one of the key things will be that making sure that these policies are compatible with each other, and because we ultimately the council's interest is in having inclusive growth as well.
So stitching them into each other, integrating them together important piece of work. So on the subject of the economy, we're just going to put up a poll just to sort of get your views. So if we publish this, so what you should see on your screen, hopefully, is just a question about just asking, what do you think Bristol's sort of economy needs to see? What are the changes that Bristol's economy needs to see? If you sort of click on that and submit a vote, there's a range of options there. If there isn't an option that you'd like to see, if there's an option there that you think that we've missed, then please just sort of drop it into the chat. So better transport's coming up. Planning, there's one for you. Infrastructure investment, tackling deprivation. I mean, I'd be greedy and say all of those things, actually. Throw as much as you can at it, but yeah, interesting responses coming in. There is some questions coming in, and there's some ones coming in on the chat as well. So we will go through those, but I just want to go on to sort of one more question that we had on our list, because I think we can then follow with some of the questions that are in the chat, and I will move to planning. So right homes, right places, jobs in the right places, as the phrase goes. You know, it's self-evidently important, a part of your portfolio as well. We know that the local plan is now being looked at, and the council is sort of updating the public on process. Can you provide sort of any sort of updates or comments?
Yeah. So it is. We are going through the formal part of the process now, and the council has people on the call. Some of the people on the call. This council had 169 questions that the planning inspector asked that they wanted answers to, and the deadline for that is tomorrow. Officers are still finalising their response to those. So those will be getting. Those will be getting finalised and sent off to the inspectorate and in the next few hours, I guess, or at least the next day or so. It is, it's been an extensive piece of work for them, and in addition to starting to consider the 106 questions in the NPPF consultation as well. Once they're submitted, I believe they are published as part of the overall, the overall evidence bundle with the planning inspectorate. Do the public hearings later this year. The aim is still, the hope is still that we get to a stage where we get a response back from the planning inspectorate late this year, the opportunity to make any amendations as appropriate, and then get to a stage where we can adopt the plan at full council early next year. We have stood up within the council. We've stood up a local plan working group, which previously had sort of oversight of this process, and they've stood up again so that they can continue that oversight over the next couple of months, and then, as I say, the plan will come through the Economy and Skills Committee and then subsequently full council. We are expecting, obviously, I mentioned earlier that the NPPF is under review, and they're as well as the standard method of calculating housing need. We are expecting that we're going to have to basically commit to starting the local plan process pretty much immediately, because even with the reduced targets for Bristol, the figures in the local plan will still be considerably short of the standard, the new standard method, and so I think the wording is we have to do it sometime, as soon as reasonable. But I think the expectation is we will be starting again once we get it in place.
An ongoing piece of work, and I think Tom. So Tom Shepherd, thanks for your question, Tom. You sort of left a question in the chat, which I think you've sort of just addressed, actually, sort of asking about the NPPF. So Tom was asking, how is the council looking at the recent NPPF changes and the new approach to sort of national government on building more homes? So, which I think you've just answered, but is there anything else you'd like to say on that?
Yeah, I think there's maybe a couple of things. So, you're right, and the local plan ultimately has to it has to provide homes, but it also has to balance that with the need to provide employment land.
Yeah.
And that underpins economic growth as well. And there's also so that's one thing I would say on that. And then second thing I'd say on that is the regional aspect to this, and that is of course another potential area of change within the region, and the expectation that combined authorities will have a growth plan of their own, but also the speculation that there may be requirements for a sort of broader spatial plan of some description. And we'll have to see what comes of that, because there's a lot of speculation and not a lot of detail as yet.
Yeah, and this sort of feeds into a sort of a question from John Sisman, who works in the property industry, asking, will the council seek to preserve and protect employment in the central city, in the city centre? How do you sort of balance that against the move to sort of bring housing into the city on sites like Mead Street? So how do you do that without sort of pushing jobs out of the city?
It's a very good question, and it's something that's come up in various discussions I've had thus far, and I don't think we know all the answers yet. I represent a ward in the south of the city, far south of the city, Hengrove and Whitchurch Park. We know that some of the most deprived areas of the city are in the south, particularly around Hartcliffe and Withywood, and we also know that those areas suffer from lack of easy and affordable public transport to get to the areas of the employment. And there's a real tension at the heart of development between the conflicting needs for, as I said, building homes, providing student accommodation, which I saw also came up in the chat, and and employment land, and the type of employment as well. And I think that is a real challenge as to how we get, how we square that circle. And I think that's something that's going to become increasingly important over the next few years as the city develops. There are ways potentially to intensify the use of employment land, but there is also that challenge of what that means. What does employment mean? How do we ensure that the right jobs are in the right places for the people with the skills for those jobs? And how do we ensure that where people don't have quite the right skills, where they can maybe access the retraining or provision that they need to upskill or to change skills? Yeah,
and it feeds into discussions around things like density. How do you make the best use of the sort of the scarce number of sites that you've got? Connectivity. It's a complicated puzzle, isn't it? So
I think I just to jump back in again, I think it also shows the importance in those areas where we can and where we have where we're able to, the importance of sort of master planning, trying to get ahead of the market in master planning. So often the market is ahead of the council, for all sorts of reasons, and the market tends to go for what's most viable, profitable initially, and that and there's another tension there as if you want to shape areas with particular characteristics or particular types of uses, how we best do that in a way that sends clear signals that this area is for employment use or that area is for residential or whatever.
Yeah, well, thanks for your question anyway, John. Appreciate that. Paul Britton on the planning, on the subject of planning. So Paul Britton works for the LGA. I hope that's still correct, Paul. He asks, so the government is looking for combined authorities to take on strategic housing, have that sort of that regional function. Do you have a view as to how that could work in Bristol with other councils?
Yeah, I think this is a key area because Bristol is landlocked, and very limited addition, space in which to expand or develop, beyond mostly brownfield sites and a handful of green belt areas, some of which we're already releasing from the green belt, and having a more strategic view at a regional level will help with those negotiations with neighbouring authorities, and in getting them to support Bristol's unmet need for the benefit of everyone in the region. And I think it's quite often the argument is sort of very often about it is natural for people within a local authority to think just of their local authority, their residents, their residents' concerns and their immediate needs of that authority. But I think the broader regional overview is it's such that if Bristol's successful and if Bristol has its housing needs met and and that provides employment and it grows the economy, benefits the surrounding areas as well. And I think that's something that needs a wider viewpoint, an overview at a higher level to actually make that case more cogently, I think.
Yeah. So partnership working is key.
And partnership working, yeah.
So I'm just looking. Sorry, you carry on.
Partnership working, but also with that sort of guiding hand, I guess.
Yeah. Thank you. So so the other question I was going to ask, I've gone at this in a slightly different order because of how the sort of conversations evolved, really. But you have so major developments sit within your brief.
Yes. So you seem to you dropped out a bit for me there, Ben. I missed the last bit of what you said there.
So just saying, major developments sort of sit in your brief. Tell us more about those.
Yes. So I've so there are a number of regen areas within the city, and we have a specific regen team who are able to do some of that master planning work and to sort of develop policies specific to areas, some of which may be adopted at citywide level in due course. And those regeneration areas are areas like I think I saw Mead Street mentioned in the chat, areas that are really going to experience a real changing character over the coming years, and maybe and need to be treated more carefully than individual sites in isolation elsewhere. So those regeneration sites are the Temple Quarter. That's probably the flagship and the most major. There's been a limited liability partnership between the University of Bristol, the West of England Combined Authority, and Bristol City Council, established to work on the master planning for that area, the inclusive growth policy that I mentioned earlier, and the development down there. That will also hopefully in due course include Network Rail, who are a big part of the puzzle in St Philip's Marsh with with the rail network running right through that, and the depot as well, the GWR depot. So Temple Quarters is a key area. It's also changed. It's also getting to a stage where you can see material change on the ground. The university campus building is due to be capped out a couple of weeks' time. The eastern gateway to Temple Meads is due to be wrapped up until such times as the university building is complete and people can then use the get through that site and into Temple Meads from the eastern side. So there's a lot of, and there's subsequently going to be a southern gateway site, and so another entrance into access to Temple Meads, and regeneration around the northern entrance. So there's going to be huge. The station there is going to be, and the university are catalyst to huge change in that area that will facilitate greater permeability through the site and access, as I say, to the station, but also a changing economic employment landscape, and that's partly what I alluded to earlier on in terms of how do we manage employment land and also employment types.
Yeah.
Another area is the city centre in Broadmead. There's been proposals that sort of look at how the changing nature of retail presents opportunities to improve the city centre, but also maybe change some of the uses in different parts of the city centre a bit. It also provides opportunities to consider transport through that area, so mass transit, whether that's Metrobus or some other option, but looking at reforming the way that the bus network works and interacts with the built environment there. And there's also major development proposed on the site of the galleries, which again will be quite transformative and make the area more permeable. There's the Froome Gateway, which is anticipated to have a mix of uses. And there's been a lot of work done there in terms of how that could look, how that street scene will work, and also but also how we help potentially manage market supply. So one of the things within the local plan is the caps on purpose-built student accommodations that apply in different areas of the city. So we're conscious that what's coming through on the Froome Gateway is the proposals to date that have been public have all proposed purpose-built student accommodations such that the cap will be met, if not slightly exceeded. And so that's, and so we're seeking to send signals to, potential other developers in the area that, we need to, they need to be considering what they propose in light of that fact and in light of what's in the local plan. There's the Bedminster Green and White House Street developments. Again, major areas that have changed. The Bedminster Green developments were sort of the catalyst for the formation of the regeneration team because of the way that those came about and the reaction in the locality. And then the White House Street development has seen much higher levels of community engagement and buy-in from local community organisations about changing use and shaping of that. And then the final couple to mention are there's a harbour pace shaping strategy, which will be going out to consultation shortly, which looks at how we can improve the harbour side facilities for the different user groups that are there, whether it's recreational, creative industries, street traders, nighttime economy, or just people who enjoy a walk around the harbour. So that's going out to consultation shortly, and a further consultation will follow in due course on Western Harbour, and that's another huge area of opportunity for the city, where there's, but also of huge complexity, because there's the bridge infrastructure and the requirements to maintain a highway over Western Harbour, and there's also a lot of heritage assets to take into account, the complications of A bond and B bond warehouses, which are listed, but also not have limited other use cases potentially. So there is an awful lot going on, and I think the key thing is that the regen team, having the regeneration team in these areas, provides an overview that helps us shape the development of those in a more managed way. And it's not the long and short of our ambition. There are other areas of potential major regeneration that, if we had the funding, would sit within that remit of the regen team. And some of those are further out from the centre. A lot of those areas are centre or centre adjacent. And, we're conscious that there are other areas of the city that could do with potentially significant regen work if we had the resources to do it.
Thank you. That's a really sort of comprehensive overview of major projects. I mean, do you have just a sort of follow-up question, if I may? How can people on this? There's a fair few people on this call who have interest in sort of placemaking, regeneration, and how can they sort of engage in with the sort of regeneration team sort of if they've got sort of thoughts to share with you?
I mean, they can come. I mean, I guess my door's always open, so I'm happy to respond to people and meet with people, and to take on board their concerns and queries and suggestions and offers, and take those back to officers as appropriate. I think more broadly, if people are looking to sort of develop and help the city grow, I think it's to seek to understand the council's corporate strategy and aims. And the corporate strategy, I believe, is going to get a bit of a refresh, but not, but it's more a refresh than a rewrite, as I understand it. So to understand the corporate strategy and aims of the city, I think respond to the consultations and engagement exercises as and when those arise. And I know that there are various channels in which those are publicised, and some of those go directly to stakeholder groups as appropriate. Engage with the One City process potentially. That's something that is one of the key sort of interactions between the council and the broader landscape of the city. And I think when developers are looking at proposals, it's finding ways of adding value that really do benefit the city. So whether that's finding ground floor uses that are going to make an active street scene, or cooperating with neighbouring developments so that they can have a sort of common approach to to the street or to the river, depending on the location or whatever it is, so that there's cooperation and a consistency of approaches as far as possible. That'd be great.
Thank you, and that's a really nice segue onto sort of my next question, which is about One City. So that's a process that's continuing under the new administration, and One City is a way of sort of bringing people together, making connections, discussing ways of supporting each other and supporting the city as well to be the best that it can be. Tell me, what can people sort of expect from the process going forward?
So the One City process is, as I said earlier, I think the people that I've engaged with through One City have been relieved and reassured that we're continuing with that process. So I'm in my role as chair of Economy and Skills Committee. I'm also co-chair of the Economy and Skills One City Board. And we are looking at one of our key things that we're looking at is pay gap reporting, pay gap minimisation across different equalities strands. So whether that be for women or people with disabilities or people of colour. So that's one of the key things. I spent this morning in the One City multi-board meetup and looking ahead at a One City gathering in November, which I think unfortunately is already fully booked. We've also got our next One City Economy and Skills Board on October the 3rd. Now we are going through a refresh at the moment of board membership. So there is a process which I think is opening today to refresh the membership of that board. So applications are open. So if there are people on the call who are interested in interacting with the One City Economy and Skills Board, and interested in being on the One City Economy and Skills Board, that process is now, I believe, more or less live. Don't quote me on exactly when things go up on websites or whatever. But if you are interested, drop me a line and I can put you in touch with the One City team about applying to be on the board. We have committed to, we do continue to have the One City team in council, and we have just recruited to a new permanent head of the One City office. They have not been named yet. I don't know who they are, but we have committed to a permanent role in the One City office. So it is here to stay, and we are here to keep engaging. The nature of that engagement, is the relationship has changed because as a committee chair rather than a cabinet member, my route to take these things back into council is slightly changed. But the overall format is continuing as it was for the foreseeable.
Well, we've just put a link up sort of while you were sort of talking about that. We'll circulate it sort of after the meeting so that people could sort of find out more about it. But tell me, we'll just sort of put a poll up here, actually. Just interested to know sort of what people's level of engagement and awareness of the One City process is. Are you aware of it? Have you ever been involved? Do you go to the meetings? Or is it something that hasn't yet... that isn't yet sort of across what you're doing? So yeah, there's fair levels of awareness here, fair levels of awareness there. Yeah, it's a good it's a good set of meetings. We very supportive of that process and have made we've supported last year some communications around the Just Transition, the group that was sort of working for the council on that, and sort of help them out with some of their communications. So we will send some information through about that. We have about 10 minutes, so we'll get through as many questions as we can. Taking the spirit of the One City approach on, and looking at some of the feedback to some of the early questions too, it strikes me that the best chance that Bristol, or any city, any place for that matter, Bristol's not alone in this, but the best chance we've got of success here is if we can encourage and enable sort of everyone to sort of play a part, and create an environment where everyone is benefiting from the fantastic opportunities that the city presents us. Now that's a big challenge. But what's your sort of message to people on this call who who have their own parts to play in different ways?
Gosh. I think it sort of comes back a bit to what I was saying earlier, is to find those ways of it's to find those ways of interacting with the council that help them and us build a better city, but also to look at where they can add value to what's being proposed, so in such a way that it does meet the the broader corporate aims of the city, the one city goals, looks at building sustainably, looks at building communities that function as communities rather than meeting housing goal targets, or just being student flats or whatever it happens to be. So I think it's about getting that broader picture.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of comments on sort of one city as we go through. Ben Stevenson sort of made a couple of points. Thanks, Ben. So one city is great. There should be more sort of formal citizen overlay. So using that as a sort of like an interface with the public, and fair comment there. And then an earlier question he asked. Since the one city boards are being retained, how does the work of these boards and the committees interface with each other?
Yeah, that is a very good question, and I don't think we've got a screwed down answer on that yet. I think as things evolve, we've got a new one city plan will be developed next year, and I think a large part of that work is going to be looking at how it dovetails with the operation of committees, as opposed to to the sort of vision of a mayoral office, as sort of previously the case. And I think that's something that we're going to have to do a fair amount of thinking on, about how they best interact. And I think one of the things I need to and my fellow chairs, because all the committee chairs have a corresponding one city board that they also co-chair, and I think one of the pieces of work we'll have to do is think about how we report back, both ways. So how we report, how what we do as an economy and skills committee is reported into the economy and skills board, and dovetails with what the economy and skills board does, but also likewise the methods for communicating back what one city board is doing through the sort of more formal channel of the committee. And yeah, that's a work in progress, I think.
Yeah, and integration is hard. It's because there's lots of things to address. So
there is lots of things to address, and I think and the whole move to committee system has been it's been a huge learning curve for everyone involved. So it's been a learning curve for the officers, it's been a learning curve for the politicians, and there are things that aren't quite right, or could work better, and we've built in a review of the process, which is due to commence later this year. It's going to look at the way things are working and work out where the deficiencies are, or where the process could be clearer, or whether that's protocols, whether that's the actual mechanisms for the committees, how they work, whether that's the distribution of the responsibilities. All those things will be looked at in terms of making sure it's working as efficiently as it can.
Thank you. And then there was another question that I think Ben had raised. I'm just looking for it now. So yeah, I mean it's related, but it's a slightly different question, and it wouldn't be a webinar of this nature without talking about silos in some way, actually. So how do we crack that challenge to sort of bring things together and stop silo working around sort of areas like skills, transport, health?
It is a real challenge. I think from my observation so far, so I'll say a couple of things on this. I think from my observation so far is that all the committee chairs are actually quite keen to ensure that other committee chairs and where relevant ward members are included in briefings on things that are cross-cutting. So we have our fortnightly meeting of leaders and chairs, which is an opportunity to look at various developments within the council. But also in between time, there have been occasions when I've gone to scrutiny and resources or transport briefings specifically because of cross-cutting nature of some of the work we do. So I think there is a willingness at committee chair level to ensure that there is that sort of oversight across teams. Within the council itself, it can be hard, and I think that's something that the council has worked hard on. I'm sure people will argue that could probably work harder on, but the one council approach is something that has, is supposed to try and address those issues. But I know that I saw a question earlier somewhere, talking about the how we get internal responses within planning for to planning applications, and it's something that I know officers are concerned about and are looking at ways to address and ensure that where transport, for example, needs to have input on a planning application, that is seen as part of their day-to-day job and not an add-on that that can be pushed down the road. There's more that can be done. There's always more that can be done, but I think it's something that the council is aware of at a senior officer level, and that needs to maybe be embedded more. And it's certainly something that policy chairs are aware of.
Yes, Peter Mansell, transport consultant, asked that question. So I'm glad we've got to that before the end. Thank you for prompting me, and thanks for your question as well, Peter. Well, we've covered a lot of ground there, and we've got a couple of minutes to just sort of close off. So I will, I'll bring this to a close now, but it leaves it for me to just say thank you to Andrew for taking the time to join us and answer those questions. And thanks for everyone for joining us and sticking with it till the end as well, which is always a relief when you do these things. But I hope you found it useful, and I hope you've sort of come away learning something that you didn't know before you joined the call. That's the sort of intention of this. We'll do something similar again soon, and we will stay in touch with you. We've got an email that's going out tomorrow, I think, that you will get as you've sort of signed up for this. So I hope you find these emails useful. We send them out on a monthly basis. Always welcome your feedback on those. So, I mean, in terms of the points we've covered today, the key points for me sort of relates to the change that's happening in Bristol, which we've discussed today, and sort of our relationship to that as individuals, as business owners, as people within our communities as well. And as Andrew has said, I think from a comms perspective, it's clearly important to understand the council's evolving priorities, coming out within its strategies, and how projects or particular pieces of work can align with them. So how can we do that to help the city succeed? And embracing partnership working is really important. Collaboration needed to build relationships and trust. We need to tell our stories better, I think. I would say that, wouldn't I? But I think we need to do that much better in some respects. And I hope that we can listen a bit more and stop shouting at the other side a bit less, and recognise that in places like Bristol and in cities in particular, there's a lot of good collaborative working taking place, and it's the best chance we've got of succeeding. Politicians can come in for tremendous flack, but I see locally a willingness to really make it work, and we're certainly up for that as well. So if anyone would like to continue the discussion in person, please feel free to drop me a line. Otherwise, we'll be in touch. I'll see you again soon. Thanks again for joining us, and thank you, Andrew.
No, thank you. And if people want to get in touch with me directly about anything, my address is public, but I popped it in the chat anyway.
Great. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.
Okay. Thank you.
Cheerio.